Welcome to the DadDHD Podcast.
Welcome to the DadDHD Podcast. This is Shane Thrapp of Creating Order from Chaos.
And this is Braden Young from Empower ADHD Solutions.
Hey everyone, this is our first official episode. We're going to get this party started. We've got another podcast that's going to drop this week that's going to probably actually drop before this one. It's about a new study that just came out of Washington University, and it's going to be pretty cool. It's all about ADHD medication. But today we just kind of want to talk about fatherhood and what it's kind of meant for us in our lives. And why are we doing this podcast? We gave you all a little blurb and everything like that, but we want to talk about like what it really means for us and why this is important. And hopefully along the way, y'all kind of go, oh, hey, maybe these guys know what they're talking about, and keep following us. As always, all of our stuff's going to be in the show notes below. Hit that like, follow, and subscribe, and let's get going. So Braden, talk to us about fatherhood. What does it mean for you?
Fatherhood kind of has a special meaning for me. I had an interesting relationship. I'll start with my history here. I had an interesting relationship with fatherhood in that I didn't meet my biological dad until I was an adult, so I didn't really have him in my life growing up. My stepdad, who passed away when I was 17, he and I had a very contentious relationship, and he wasn't a good role model for me in any way, shape, or form. So I vowed to basically not follow my fatherhood role models and try and be a better dad. And so for me, fatherhood is all about being the best I can be to make sure that my kids, one, don't live the life that I lived growing up, and also make sure that they just don't grow up to be crappy people. And I mean,
Get that one, my dude.
Yeah. So I've got an adult stepdaughter who I've raised since she was 2 years old, and I've also got a 5-year-old son, and both of them are neurodivergent, and I've got very different perspectives on both of them since I didn't get my diagnosis until I was well into her teens, and she didn't get her diagnoses of ADHD or autism until she was in her 20s. So it's been very eye-opening seeing the difference in them, and also how much education can play a role in knowing about their neurodivergent diagnosis. So I think that that's the biggest thing. The reason that I do this and everything else I do in the ADHD and autism communities is to try and make sure that there's education around so that my kids grow up in a world that's more accepting of it. And being the best dad I can to 2 neurodivergent kids is the best way to do it, because it starts at home, right?
Ooh.
I'm going to go ahead and flip the question around on you now, Shane. What fatherhood mean to you?
Man, for me, so like I dealt with my father. Like I didn't have to deal with the same situation as you. And, like I knew my father, and that's such a complicated story for me, though. I mean, I feel like I could fill this entire episode about stories about my father, and I don't want to do that. But like my dad was, as I kind of look back, undiagnosed ADHD, but he self-medicated with alcohol, and he was abusive. And I think he tried. I think that's the biggest struggle I have with the story of my fatherhood is I think my dad tried hard to be a good father. And when he was sober, he was amazing. And like I've got stories that we've talked about it before. Like my dad saved my lives multiple times. Like I grew up way country. Like our nearest Walmart was like 75 miles away. That tells you like how far in the boondocks we were.
Wow.
And and like hospitals weren't really close. And so like I got bit by snakes as a kid. And I remember my dad doing a country thing with a snake kit where he cuts you open and sucks the poison out. I never went to a hospital for that stuff. And there was just a bunch of situations that I look back at it now and I'm going, I feel like he tried, but man, when he would drink, that all the judgment and anger and frustration, because I was a hard kid to parent. I didn't make any sense to him. I didn't want to go hunting. I didn't want to work on cars. I wanted to read all the time. And I had so many questions. I was that kid that asked the why all of the time. And like his answer was to buy me the Encyclopedia Britannica when I was 8. And, that right there tells you kind of like my dad got it, but he didn't know how to approach it. Like, how do I help this child that is literally entirely too smart for his own good and knows it and has zero problem telling other people, other adults, and like just a lot of stuff like that. But kind of like you, like when I got into my adulthood and like kids actually became a thing, like when my first son, I've got a 22-year-old, a 19-year-old, and twin 6-year-olds. And they're all neurodivergent. And like, but whenever we were like kind of like looking at the fact that, holy crap, there's a kid on the way with my first wife, I was scared to death. But I remember talking to a friend of mine and he goes, look, you can just not be your father. And I was like, what does that even mean? I was terrified of being like my dad. And I also dealt with an anger issue. And I dealt with drug issues, but my ex-wife actually got me off drugs before we even got married. But I still dealt with an anger issue. And then, of course, we had Keenan, and he was awesome. He was amazing. I remember just like that first moment of holding him. I'm like, okay, I'm not going to be my father. But I was also unmedicated and undiagnosed ADHD and autistic. And his mother and I were not good people together. After a while, it was good at first. It was good for the first year, but she fell in love with the mask that I had put on. And whenever that mask started slipping, I wasn't the guy that she needed me to be. And it's when like the sniping would happen and stuff like that, and my dysregulation would happen. And I kind of made a vow, like, I won't hit my kids. I'll never be that dad anymore. Right? I figured like that, but looking back, I'm like, that bar was too low because yelling was still in the picture. And my kids would get frustrated. I would get frustrated. My ex-wife would get frustrated. Yelling became a thing, which then, of course, dysregulated the kids even worse, But with Kylie, I really tried to just be a better father. And then, of course, a couple of years later, we had our divorce, and then things went to hell. And, I spent a lot of time just healing from what now I can recognize as an abusive ex-wife. And we're going to talk about that one day, y'all. We're going to talk about how men can be abused in your relationships. That's a big conversation to have. But when I met my current wife, Darcy, like, she made me feel safe enough to be able to talk about a lot of this stuff. And of course, I'd gone through therapy at that point. And as we kind of like, I started really addressing those different issues, I started recognizing how low that bar was that I had put with my first 2 kids, and how I failed them as a father. And that was kind of like my turning point for the work that I'm doing. Like you, I want to provide a space for my kids who were born super early to grow up and be good people and, do good things. And if I can do that as well as if I can do that for myself, but also help other parents, it's a win-win. The more that I do it for other parents, the more that I remember to do it for myself. The more I keep reminding other parents, like, hey, stimming is a thing. Your kids will stim. That's a normal thing, especially if they're neurodivergent. my son, like whenever he is playing video games, he bounces up and down like a rabbit. And I remember we were up in Ohio for Christmas, and his grandmother like got to see him play video games for the first time, and she was like, all right, Liam, just go ahead and sit down, sit down. And I'm like, wait, no, don't even bother. He's good. He's gonna bounce. It's just his thing. Just let it go. But I was able to say it with kindness, right? I wasn't snapping at her or anything like that. But I was able to stand up for my son and be like, advocate for him. And it's because of all the work that I do in the parent groups.
And that's amazing. Like being able to recognize that and be able to accept that's just how our kids are going to be. With my son especially, he's definitely got the hyperactive aspect of things, and he has to stem. And so there's times when he's been sitting long enough that he literally just has to get up from the table or whatever, watching a show, and just run laps around the living room, to get that out of him. And some people like have looked at that and thought, okay, he needs to sit down and be still. It's like, no, he doesn't. And that's not something that we should be telling our kids.
Yeah, that's actually a real good point, because my son, when we try to do the traditional eat around the table thing, as everybody wants to do. Let's make the table, eat around the table. But both of my kids, like they can't sit still. Now my daughter doesn't do this, but my son does. Where like mid eating, he'll kind of just stop, pause, and then just like jump up and run. I have no idea where he's just like running a track around the house, and then he comes back and he eats more. And I found that whenever I sat here and said, hey, I just want you to sit here and eat, when we try to set a boundary for like, hey, just go ahead and sit here and eat, they wouldn't eat as much. They would leave food on the plate. But if I let him do that thing, and when I didn't correct Harley from doing her bouncing thing, they would eat. And so I kind of fell back into that, what my doctor told us when we were talking about diet and eating and stuff like that. Fed is best. If he needs to take a break from eating to go run around to burn out energy, but he's coming back to eat, I mean, my boundary is like, just make sure he comes back to eat. Like, make sure he doesn't get distracted by video games or something like that. Make sure I'm pulling him back to the table. But that worked out a lot better when it came to food consumption.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think that's where the education part of it has come in so handy, because it's like, these are things that, I mean, granted, we didn't really have that specific issue with our daughter, but like, these are things I would have never known when they were little. And it also, I guess, and this is something that I do a lot between especially me and my son, is I notice the differences between when I was a kid versus him. And there are things, though, that I see that, like when I was a kid, I would constantly be moving. I remember getting always told, like, stop doing the leg thing with where I'm bouncing my leg and, making noises or things like that. And I realize now that those are my way of stimming when I was at the dinner table and everything. But I was always told to stop. So I just learned naturally to mask it. And that caused havoc in my life, because like then I end up not eating as much. I didn't have nearly as much nutrition. I didn't like sitting down for dinner. It was a miserable time for me. And so now being able to do it with, let our son be more open to do what he needs to do, it makes it a little bit more enjoyable of a time. And he looks forward to that time because he knows that he doesn't have to hide, and it can be his time to unmask, and home can be that safe place. And that's what I want to be as a father, as a parent, to be that safe place.
We're going to take a quick break, everyone. We're going to come back after a couple of messages from our sponsors, which is us right now. But if you're interested in this, let us know.
Living with ADHD can feel overwhelming. The missed deadlines, the burnout, the constant feeling of falling behind. I'm Braden Young, and I help adults with ADHD stop fighting their brains and start working with them. Through strengths-based coaching, practical tools, and real support, I help you build clarity, confidence, and momentum that actually lasts. You are not broken. You are wired differently. Empower yourself today at empoweradhdsolutions.com. Link in the show notes. Welcome back to the DadDHD Podcast. We're going to kind of change gears up a little bit. We were talking about letting our kids be themselves while at home. I'd like to talk a little bit about helping our kids be who they are at school and whatnot, and being able to go out and advocate for our kids. So I'll start the question off with you. What are your thoughts on advocating for our kids, Shane?
I see this a lot. One of the things that I love about the kids' school they're currently at is the teachers really communicate a lot with us, and that's not something that a lot of parents actually get to deal with a lot, especially in the larger schools. Our kids are in kind of a smaller school, and when a teacher has 30 some odd kids in a class, it's kind of hard for them to be reaching out all the time, but our teachers really do a great job. But I think what has really helped us is like when we went into the parent-teacher conference, and I think this is one of the reasons why I feel the need for this podcast is, fathers. This is one of the places where we need to be going to. We need to be calling out from work and saying, hey, I've got to go to my parent-teacher thing with my wife and be there. Because we just need to be more involved. And I know it's hard, y'all. Like, I hear a lot of y'all out there. Like, please don't give me too much hate in the comments, but I'm being serious about this. I know that a lot of us work and things of that nature, but it's really important for us also to be involved in different ways. And part of it is being the protector. That means advocating for our kids and going in there and just like listening to the teacher and then giving your feedback. My son does really good whenever he's able to go outside and play, especially after school. That's one of those things that we really talk about. And we kind of let the teacher know, like, what are we doing at home to kind of help our kids, especially if they have neurodivergence. Because we want them to understand, like, how do you, like one of the, perfect example actually is one of the things that really helps my son because he has to deal with a lot of emotional dysregulation is co-regulating. And co-regulating for him and I is kind of just like me recognizing that he's really starting to get freaked out, starting to get angry, starting to get frustrated, whatever reasoning it is. We were playing Super Mario, like old school, like Super Nintendo Super Mario the other day. I introduced him to it. And about halfway through the first level, he started raging out because he was just like, Daddy, why can't you make the jump? Why do I keep falling down the hole? And it really actually dysregulated him to the point where, okay, this is it. Inside, I was like, get good, son. But at the same time, I'm like, hold on a second, bro. All right, pause. You can pause this game. Cool. All right, come here. Let's just breathe. Please don't throw the controller. I did that one time. Please don't throw the controller. These are heavy and they cost a lot of money. Breathe with me. Cool. You good? All right. Now get good, son. And try again. And that's the kind of stuff I had to talk to the teacher about. Was just like, whenever he's really starting to get frustrated or anything like that, if you just take him off to the side and just breathe with him, and just like co-regulate with him and help him, it will reset him very quickly. Because this is something that we've been doing for years. For a lot of y'all don't know this, but my kids were born at 27 weeks. And so like from the get-go, I mean, even like as they were in the NICU, my wife and I were like, we are going to just raise them as if they're neurodivergent. We're going to put in place everything as if they're neurodivergent because the likelihood, not just because of me having ADHD and autism, but also being born premature. My daughter had a mild CP diagnosis because of the brain bleed. The assumption was necessary, and so we just did it. And that's kind of where we kind of keep going into these classrooms and surprising a lot of these teachers and, to other parents and stuff like that, where our kids like start to have a meltdown and me or Darcy are like, hold on a second. Breathe. Let's just breathe. You know what I mean? And that's what advocacy really means to me, is not being ashamed of the fact that my child may get dysregulated, but teaching other people what to do in that process. Hey, please don't raise your voice to my son. He's struggling right now. Hold on a second. I'll take care of this. And taking him off to the side. Not out of shame. I'm not going to make him feel ashamed for how he's feeling because he doesn't need that crap. But like, hey, talking to his grandparents and explaining to them, like, hey, if you see Liam starting to deal with this, or if you see Harley starting to get freaked out or anything like that, here's some of the things that we do, right? It's teaching other parents what to expect, you know? And I think that kind of advocacy is really necessary for a lot of people.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I think that why it's really important to me, and I'll touch on some of the other things that you talked about too, is educating them in what to do if my kid gets dysregulated. I will say that my son's teacher is amazing. Like in fact, last year he was in transitional kindergarten, and she saw him on field trips and whatnot that they took with the kindergartners. And she was immediately last year, like, I want him in my class. Like, so she knew, but she's been really amazing at helping him regulate and everything at school. And so she kind of knew to look for the signs already. He goes also to after school care, which they are much less informed on a lot of those issues. And so one of the things that we ended up having to do, I ended up having to write a letter to them, basically letting them know like what signs to look for if he's starting to get dysregulated. His big issue is he's got a lot of sensory issues. And so when he goes into like the gym for play, it's super echoey, super loud. And that, as much fun as he might be having, it so dysregulates him. And so we've learned to look out for things like he's starting to get extra irritable. He's starting to get disoriented physically because he's got a lot of proprioception issues, which is where kids don't understand where they're at in personal three-dimensional space. And so he'll start deliberately bumping into other kids, and they thought that he was being mean and trying to hit kids. It's like, no, he's just trying to get his senses regulated. And so we taught them things like that to look for. And because of that, they knew that, okay, he's starting to do that stuff. Let's go ahead and pull him aside into a quiet corner where he can kind of re-regulate himself. And ever since like they saw those kinds of things and started being able to do that, it's made a night and day difference for him. And so I think that's where it really showed me that advocating for them, and because we see those behaviors every day ourselves at home, and being able to take that and teach the educators and the caregivers like what to look for is huge for our kids, because some of these things, they just automatically assume that they're being a bad kid, or they're trying to hurt other people or things like that. And it's not that at all. Or if there's a reason that our kid is acting out, there's a reason, and they need to know the real reason. That's not just misbehaving. They just need to be regulated in some way. And so like we've also started early with our son, teaching him to, if he was starting to get emotionally dysregulated, to be able to actually breathe and everything.
Yeah. My daughter actually has noise canceling headphones that she has in her backpack for much of the same reason. Like whenever they go to gym and everything, she gets to have those on, and it's kind of like part of the just communication that we have with them. You also mentioned something that really resonated with me that I kind of want you to expand on. What do you say to parents or teachers or others who like push back on you? Who are like, oh, your child is just being a little badass or whatever and everything like that.
My biggest thing that I talk to them about is that if that were the case, then the things that we do to intervene with him wouldn't work. And the reality is that ultimately kids are trying their best. When they're at school, they are having to mask so much. It's exhausting for them. And I throw it back at them. What do you do how do you start to act when you're extra tired at the end of the day and you just want to go to bed or take a nap or whatever? You're probably pretty cranky and pretty disoriented, I'm guessing. They usually look back, well, yeah. Well, now take that and multiply it by about 50,000, because that's what our kids are doing, just trying to exist in a world not designed for them, in a classroom where they're told to sit down and be quiet all day. That's not how their nervous systems are set up. And so they're having to fight that all day long. And the fact that they're getting as far as they are is pretty miraculous and amazing. And I think that a lot of them, once they see that, they start to pick up on it. There's a few people at our son's school that are not very attuned to the whole idea of neurodivergence. And so when it comes to things, they do give a lot of pushback. But the biggest thing has been we have evidence-based tactics or skills that we've learned over the years that we've been able to implement that work at home and have worked in other scenarios. And if they work there, they're going to work in school. And that's why I think it's really important to get a team of people for our kids to work with us, because you start getting all those different perspectives. We're going to go ahead and take a quick break now to hear from our sponsors, and we'll be back in a few minutes.
All right, welcome back from the break, y'all. We're going to kind of talk about, we've touched on it a couple of different times about, starting early on and how we've had that privilege to be able to do that with our kids. And so we're going to give some of you with the younger kids some advice on what you can do, especially the fathers. Braden, what are some of the things that you've done that you saw was really successful with your children?
Well, for honestly, both my daughter and my son, one of the biggest things that have helped for us is starting early with the routines, especially bedtime routines, getting them wound down for bed. We've got a really stringent bedtime routine, which I realize is hard for some parents, but if you can at least have the elements there. So for us, it's like, we do bath time, which kind of a nice warm bath kind of winds them down a bit. And then after bath time, we do the brushing teeth, getting pajamas on, all that. And then story time after that. And having those kinds of routines is great because, one, when you have kids that are neurodivergent, they, as much as it may not seem like it, they thrive on those routines. And when their routine gets out of whack, it can be really dysregulating for them. And having that nightly routine gives them something that's consistent that they can rely on and helps them get in the mode of winding down and getting sleep. Because honestly, sleep is one of the biggest things that can affect kids with ADHD. If they don't get enough sleep, their ADHD, dysregulation, autism, all of their neurodivergent symptoms are going to be like 10 times worse. So for both of our kids, having that nightly routine has been huge and has really helped with them getting the amount of sleep that they need.
Yeah, I think for me, it's always been the transitions. Like for me, transitions have always been difficult, especially if I'm like really in the moment. And so like early on, we had started using Alexa just to kind of do the timers and the alarms for just me. Honestly, all my chores go through Alexa, and I think early on, that's kind of what we use for the kids as well. Was when we would sit here and say, say they're playing around on their tablet or something along those lines, or say they were watching YouTube, or say they were playing, we would kind of call out, "Hey, we need to go do XYZ thing," or "Hey, we need to get ready for going to the doctor. How much time do y'all want before we get going?" And we give them choices, 5 or 7 minutes. And they'd answer. 9 times out of 10, they tell us the longer time period, by the way. But choice is good here, and we know that, especially for neurodivergent kids. And then we set the timer for that thing. And that gives them the ability to kind of wind down. And it gives us the ability to kind of like not freak out, right? And then when that timer goes off, we do the thing. We immediately, all right, timer's up, let's go, and that gives them time to kind of, wind down from their video game. That gives them time to wind, to get to closer to the end of their YouTube or things along those lines. And this is also, you were talking about bedtime routines. Hey, 30 minutes until time for bedtime. And all right, Alexa set a timer for 30 minutes. And they know in 30 minutes, we're going to start doing our bedtime routine. And I think that was one of the most successful things that we've had in place for us. But it shouldn't be a rigid system though. If my son's watching a YouTube channel, and this is one of the things that we taught him by asking, by asking the questions. All right, we're going to set a timer. How much time is left on your YouTube channel? 9 minutes. All right, cool. I'm going to set a timer for 9 minutes. Kind of giving them that feedback to get information from them so that they're able to finish what they're doing. Or if we've set a timer and they were watching a video and they have like 1 or 2 minutes left, all right, how much time on your video? We got 1 minute. Cool. Go ahead and finish that out and then we'll go do the thing. That has reduced so much anxiety in our household. Like, there's a very clear cut. As soon as the Alexa goes off, everybody knows it's time to go do the thing, or it's time to have a communication about like wrapping things up. My daughter, if she's coloring or something like that, and the timer goes off, and we're like, all right, you need to finish up. She can sit here and say, I need 2 more minutes. And she'll like, Alexa, set a timer for 2 minutes. Both my kids now use it. And we have done it so much that now the kids, being 6 years old, will do it to us as parents. All right, we're going to get ready to go in 5 minutes. And now I hear Harley in the living room. Alexa, set a timer for 5 minutes. Daddy, I set a timer for 5 minutes. Thank you, Harley. Then the alarm goes up. Daddy, the alarm went off. You need to get out of the bathroom. Thank you, daughter. I appreciate you. Right? And I think that's the other thing, showing the gratitude. As parents, another thing that a lot of things have helped for us has been kind of just modeling the behavior that we want to see in our kids. And I love it because I get compliments from a lot of people. Your children are so polite. I'm like, yeah, I know. Worked hard at that. We, as adults, tell our children, thank you for doing your thing. We show gratitude to our kids, not and not out of the normal. It is our normal to show gratitude towards our kids. And that is reflected in how they approach other people. We talked about it at the very beginning where we were like, we wanted our kids to be good people, right? And so that's what we model to our kids. So like, instead of teaching our kids to yell at other people, or, because we're yelling at them all the time, instead we're co-regulating them with them. And I think that's kind of just the thing with the Alexa and having the transition periods is really just kind of helping them kind of do that transition so they don't dysregulate and get frustrated. And then we're not walking outside to the car and both my kids are just losing their minds. I'm telling y'all right now, transition timers for the win. And if you don't have Alexa or Siri or whatever, just saying, it's a good tool to be using.
I would add on visual timers too. Those are really
Visual
good.
timers, absolutely.
All right, we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. So I want to thank everybody for joining us here on DadDHD, and make sure to like and subscribe and click all the things so that you can follow us and get notifications whenever we release a new episode. So we're going to try and do this pretty regularly. So look forward to talking to you all again.